Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. The Starlight West Theater. Oakland Heights, Oregon, a defunct suburb of Portland, was known for its lavish charm and wealthy vibe. But beneath the surface, the area hides a secret that makes even the most skeptic shiver. A place that was so mysterious, it was forgotten by time, and was only a whisper or a rumor called the Starlight West Theater, a notorious nightclub known for its peculiar shows and even more peculiar owner, George Stanley. To him, the theater was like a siren's call to those who sought the unusual, a place where reality and myth blurred together into a haunting melody that was both enchanting and disturbing. Today, the alleyway on a certain street, the nightclub's facade was nondescript. Hidden behind a bookstore, the only hint of its existence was a small, tarnished brass star that gleamed in the moonlight. The door was unassuming, but it led to a world that was anything but ordinary as the foyer was dimly lit, with velvet drapes that swallowed the light and filled the air with a faint scent of roses and decay, creating an atmosphere that was both seductive and eerie. The main stage, adorned with intricate Art Deco designs, was where the heart of the Starlight West beat, pumping out a dark and mesmerizing rhythm that drew in its audience night after night. The performers, with their glinting eyes and unearthly grace, danced and sang as if under a spell, their movements eerily synchronized to the haunting melodies that played. In the 1960s, the star of the show, Evelyn Klein, was an ethereal beauty whose very presence on stage seemed to cast a shadow of sadness and fear over the room. Her voice tried to hide, captivating all who heard it, leaving them with a disturbing sense of unease that lingered long after the audience left and the theater went silent. But it was in the early 1970s that the Starlight West and its dark secrets began to unfurl when Evelyn's performances grew less than predictable. On October 9, 1973, Evelyn Klein was reported missing, and the local papers had a field day, printing salacious headlines that spoke of love triangles, secret affairs, and the use of narcotics. Starlight West Theater became the epicenter of a media frenzy that painted the theater in a sinister light despite the increased publicity. George Stanley remained tight-lipped, the creases around his eyes deepening as the days turned into weeks without any sign of his star performer. Over the next few days, other performers started doing their skits and comedy shows that were lackluster and only entertaining to those who had seen them 100 times, as the atmosphere at the Starlight West was thick with tension and whispers of Evelyn's disappearance filled the air like a heavy fog, and the formerly vibrant and energetic space now felt eerie and lifeless. The vibrant colors of the velvet curtains seemed to have faded into a sad morning shade, and the rhythm of the city had changed, and so had the theater, the heart of which had gone missing. However, the local mafia families, such as the Castellanos, had their eyes on the Starlight West for reasons beyond the macabre. The theater was a gold mine for laundering money and smuggling contraband. With Evelyn's disappearance, George and his usual sharp instincts had grown dull with grief, making the theater vulnerable to their advances, and the ruthless for this criminal enterprise enforcer named Richie DeLuca was known for his charm and cunning, had taken an interest in the place and its enigmatic owner. Oakland Heights, that was about 30 miles away from the hustle and bustle of Portland, had its quiet charm, with its tree-lined streets and quaint little shops that had a life of their own. But tonight was different. There was an unsettling stillness that hung in the air like a shroud. The Starlight West Theater stood like a silent sentinel. The heart of the former suburb is abandoned today, the whispers of its past long silenced by the march of time. Then, on June 18, 1995, some local boys who graduated from high school decided to take a road trip toward the now dilapidated remains of the proud neighborhood, now laid in disrepair as buildings crumbled and were graffitied. They had heard the stories about the Starlight West Theater and the legend of Evelyn Klein. They were curious and decided to explore the abandoned theater. The place was overgrown with ivy and the windows were shattered, but the brass star still hung above the door, a sad reminder of its former glory. The boys, armed with pocket knives, crowbars, and a camcorder, embarked on a journey into Oakland Heights, confronted with the sight of urban decay and forgotten dreams with broken glass nearly covering the streets, and hollowed buildings stripped of their former charm. They pushed through the ivy and made their way into the Starlight West Theater, and the velvet drapes hung in tatters, the carpeting now threadbare and stained with the detritus of years of neglect. The air was thick with dust, and the faint, lingering scent of decay and death filled their nostrils with fear as they ventured into the sinister building as they recorded their accounts. Then suddenly one of the boys pointed at the corner of the stage, where a spotlight pierced the gloom, revealing a dusty grand piano. Its ivory keys yellowed with age, and the instrument seemed to hum with an eerie resonance, as if it remembered the days when it was the center of the theater's mystical allure. The boys approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space, and one of them sat down and tentatively played a few notes, casting an eerie and haunting sound along with a moaning of pain as well as suffering. Around 5:30 p.m. one of them shouted, as they found a staircase hidden behind the curtains, leading down to a basement. Their flashlights flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The stench grew stronger, the air thick with the scent of decay. When the boys descended, their demeanor started to turn fearful as the stairs creaked under their weight, the sound echoing through the theater like a mournful cry. Later, the footage picked up a pair of glowing red eyes peeking through the shadows, and the sound of shuffling feet, the kind that seemed to belong to something that didn't quite walk like a human, grew louder as they ventured deeper into the basement. As the boys and their laughter from being too scared had turned into hushed whispers and nervous glances over their shoulders, their bravado of earlier replaced by a creeping sense of dread. The red eyes, unbeknownst to them at the time, started following their every move. The source of the eyes remained hidden, but the feeling of being watched grew palpable as they navigated through the cluttered basement filled with forgotten props and costumes from decades past. The air grew colder, a chill that seemed to penetrate their very bones, and the basement was a labyrinth of memories and secrets, each step taking them further from the safety of the world above. Then suddenly one of them picked up a sound of growling that made them freeze in their tracks, their flashlights shaking as they pointed them into the darkness ahead, the beams illuminating a set of yellowed fangs snarling from the shadows of a discarded prop. Their hearts racing, they realized it was a costume, a lifelike werewolf mask that once terrified audiences, but now was a mere relic of a forgotten horror. They laughed nervously and continued their exploration. The basement walls were lined with dusty, forgotten photographs of past performances, the faces of the performers frozen in time, their expressions a mix of joy and terror that seemed to follow the boys as they moved deeper into the bowels of the theater, their whispers bouncing off the cold concrete walls and the glow from their flashlights dancing across the cracked and peeling wallpaper as the camcorder picked up an orb that was hovering with malevolence that was found later on the tape. In the corner of the basement, a single light bulb flickered ominously, casting an erratic pattern of shadows on the floor, revealing a heavy metal door that stood out against the decay. It was not old, and it had a padlock that looked untouched. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up as they approached it, their curiosity now overwhelming their fear-changed nervous glances, the camcorder zooming in to capture the moment. The air was thick with anticipation and dread. However, knowing that there was power still on, they decided to charge their camcorder and phones, hoping that the outlet worked and wouldn't short-circuit. They found an extension cord hanging from the ceiling and plugged it in. The light bulb above them buzzed louder for a moment before steadying, and the camcorder's screen flickered to life, the battery icon showing a full charge. The sudden burst of brightness from the camcorder screen was a stark contrast darkness that surrounded them, and it was in this light that they noticed after reviewing the footage later. But for now, the boys were too caught up in their quest to pay much attention to the subtle cues of impending danger with the newfound courage. They approached the metal door, the padlock giving way with a satisfying click under the pressure of the crowbar. Suddenly, the camcorder picked up a whisper, faint and distant, a sound that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the theater, and their laughter died in their throats as they turned to face the open door, their flashlights sweeping the dusty floor, searching for the source of the sound. But the basement remained eerily silent, the only noise the steady drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. When the camcorder was finally charged, they continued their harrowing journey into the unknown, the whispers of the past seemingly muffled by the thick dust that coated the air. As they pushed open the metal door, it creaked on its hinges like the opening of a crypt that has been sealed off from the outside world for decades. The room was small, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in its macabre decor, with walls lined with shelves filled with jars of murky liquid and unidentifiable objects floating within, a sight that sent shivers down their spines. The centerpiece of the room was a terrifying and hideous chair with leather straps that looked as though they had been used to restrain someone or something. The chair was stained with what looked like dried blood, and the very air in the room felt charged with a sense of horror and despair, the kind that lingers long after the screams have stopped. The boys took a step back, their flashlights flickering as the reality of what they had stumbled upon began to sink in, and knew this was used by the mafia for something terrible such as torture and eventually murder, sending shivers down their spines, shaking the camcorder. Then suddenly a huge scream came from the corner of the room, making the boys jump and scream in horror, their flashlights swiveling wildly to find the source of the disturbance. A pale figure of a woman slowly stepped forward, dressed in a faded dress dripping with blood and viscera, limping her way towards the young men, pointing her finger. And they knew it was Evelyn Klein, who disappeared all those years ago, the star of the show, now a twisted form. She let out a guttural moan, her eyes glowing with rage as she approached them, her movements jerky and unnatural, making the boys stumble backward, tripping over debris and slipping on the slick floor, their eyes glued to the terrifying specter that was once a beautiful woman. And the camcorder fell from the hand of the one filming, its light rolling away and casting wild, erratic shadows across the room as it hit the ground, until one of them picked it back up and started recording. Then her raspy and choking voice said what sounded like, "Tell my story," as she glided through the air straight at them. The boys realized that the figure of Evelyn Klein was no mere illusion, but a vengeful spirit trapped in the theater by a terrible fate. The years of anger and pain had twisted her into something monstrous and vengeful, and one of the young men shouted, "How? Nobody will believe us," Evelyn replied, "In the cabinet," before disappearing into the darkness, leaving the room feeling colder than before. The boys frantically searched the cabinet and found a hidden compartment with papers later revealed to be a contract that bound Evelyn to the club, and the only way into fine print was either by forfeiture of her assets, accidental death by illness, or tragedy, sending chills down their spines. They knew they had stumbled upon something significant, something that could unravel the mystery of the Starlight West Theater and its tragic past. Then there was a map with a circle on a lake that was located near Portland, Oregon, nicknamed Concrete Lake by the locals after the people who were murdered by the mafia and dumped into it in the 1950s until the 1970s, when the murders stopped. The map had notes scribbled in the margins that spoke of rituals and sacrifices, hinting at a darker purpose behind Evelyn's disappearance than anyone could have ever imagined. The boys felt a heavy weight on their chests, the gravity of their discovery sinking in. After their ordeal, they took everything to the Portland Police Department, and an investigation was opened. About several missing people were found, now skeletons at this point, all of which had connections to the Starlight West Theater and the Castellanos Mafia. George Stanley was found living in a run-down apartment, a mere shadow of his former self, haunted by the ghosts of his past and the dark secrets he had been forced to keep. However, the most horrific discovery happened in an old fishing shack, as the mummified remains of a woman, dressed in a tattered, stained dress that matched the one seen in the theater, were pulled out from the murky waters of Concrete Lake as the boys watched from a safe distance as the news vans descended upon the area, the flashing lights casting an eerie glow across the water's surface, and their hearts sank as the reality of their adventure turned into a grim revelation of past atrocities. Later, it was revealed the mummified body belonged to Evelyn Klein, she was tortured, starved, and beaten to death because of wanting to get away from George Stanley. It took dental records to determine it was her body, and her spirit now at peace with the truth coming to light. The Starlight West Theater turned into a memorial for the victims of the mafia's influence over the area dwindled, and they arrested George Stanley, who was in his late 70s at the time, and was charged with aiding and abetting in the murder of Evelyn Klein. He confessed to knowing about the dark dealings, but claimed he was under threat from the Castellanos family. Today, the former Oakland Heights was bulldozed, and the Starlight West Theater was renovated under a new name that was not disclosed to the public. The new owners claimed they were going to turn it into a museum dedicated to the history of the area. But the locals knew better. They knew that you couldn't erase the stain of darkness that clung to that place. The whispers of the past would always linger. My messed up town, the Moonlight Inn, and its weird rules. Hi everyone, it's Mason again. I'm back to share more creepy stories about my messed up town. This one's kind of special. I was gonna wait to do an entry on this place, because it's like the biggest haunt in town. It's the building in the haunted town that citizens of the haunted town tell scary stories about. The place is about 200 years old and well maintained. It kept its rustic log cabin look, but it's been modernized with a pool, security, central air conditioning, and all that. It's a gorgeous building when you get right down to it. A sign over the main doors reads, "All are welcome in the main lobby only." The place has been owned by the Bronson family since it was built. They're the kooky folks who keep the place running and kept the mystery alive. There's only one guy there now. The parents passed away, and all the other siblings moved out of town, so I guess he runs it alone. It sits far outside of town, with a big cornfield on one side and creepy woods on the others. The inn was totally featured on 2 different ghost hunting shows. They didn't see anything super special, of course, but one team's ghost talking device thingy, I think it's called an ovilus, said, "Very haunted ceiling," when they asked questions about whether the place was haunted or not. The clips they show usually cut out the ceiling part. The town got a surge of tourism back in the early 2010s because of that. They documented the same sort of other shit that ghost teams usually record. Weird noises, cold spots, orbs, and even a shadow of a little girl, or so they say, but otherwise, nothing that really screamed, "This place is haunted as hell." Even before the ghost hunters, the place had a ton of scary happenings. Monsters sighted in the nearby woods, ghostly noises and visions within, disappearances, unexplained phenomena, strange lights or shadows, and all kinds of shit. I could fill a novel with all the rumors and stories about the Moonlight Inn. Until the last 2 weeks, I'd only been there once. But my favorite vampire hippie friend, Trista, talked to the owner and got him to hire me to come in and clean the floors once a week. She works the night shift there, so I got to see inside the infamous building for myself and hang out with her on the job. Disappointingly, I didn't see shit. But there is still something that I felt was worth mentioning, and that's the poster boards in the front hall. They were featured on the ghost shows too. They alone give the place a sense of foreboding and mystery, because nobody can confirm or deny any of them. Rather than waste time telling all the stories about this place, I feel like sharing what's written on these poster boards will speak for itself. Warning, they say at the top, in bright red letters. The Moonlight Inn has been reported to have unusual dangers, whether paranormal or not. Here is a list of ways to keep yourself safe based off what has been reported. Before I continue, let me just say, no, I'm totally not joking about this. There are literally several poster boards hung on the wall, front and center, where any guest can see them. The owner, Zach Bronson, swears they're there for safety, but when I asked if they were real, he got all cryptic and said, "They're only as real as people make them." Without further ado, here are the rules to survive the paranormal shenanigans of Fallowvale's infamous Moonlight Inn. Please respect all do not enter signs. They are there for your protection and the protection of other guests. Do not, under any circumstances, enter an area with a visible "Do Not Enter" sign. If you find yourself in an endless hallway on the second floor, keep calm. Don't proceed forward. Just go back the way you came until you've rounded the corner. There is no public bathroom on the third floor. Do not enter any door labeled as a bathroom on that floor. Noises are often reported in certain rooms. Guests can rest assured that they are safe from any animals despite sounds in the air vents. Sounds reported thus far include growls, the sounds of feet, scratching noises, whispers, and on some nights, the faint sound of caged animals. I have to jump in here. What the hell does faint sound of a caged animal sound like? 5. The cafeteria closes at 7 p.m. If you happen to be there any time after then and notice somebody serving drinks, proceed at your own risk. This individual is not a known member of our staff, and we have never met him ourselves. Thus far, they have never shown themselves to be dangerous, but they are unknown. 6. Do not disturb the long-term tenant in 213. 7. Do not disturb plates of crackers or glasses of milk you find in the hallways. They were placed by the owners as part of their spiritual beliefs. 8. Don't damage the door or window frames. Report any damaged frames to staff immediately. That's a weird one. I will say, all the door frames in the place have these really pretty carvings. They look like runes. 9. We do not have a clown on staff. Sightings of one are reported in the woods around the property. Some have said that if you mimic the clown's clapping gesture, it will leave. 10. The elevator only goes to 3 floors. Don't press any other buttons. 11. Mischievous entities are believed to inhabit paintings in the main hall, a statue of Venus on the main desk, the Sioux totem pole on display on the 3rd floor, and the bed frame in room 108. There is no danger. Try to ignore any movement or peculiarities. 12. If your television picks up a channel -1, do not watch for more than an hour. 13. Moonlight Inn has 2 Wi-Fi signals, Moonlight Public and Moonlight Private. Do not attempt to use any other Wi-Fi signals. We don't know where the others come from. Hazardous Brie signal is the one that appears most often. Some have said they're infectious to electronics. 14. Ignore the nighttime singing. The singer doesn't like to be disturbed. I thought I heard singing coming from the pool while I was there. Trista said she didn't hear anything now. 15. The nighttime howling is most likely coyotes. Don't try to seek them out. 16. Feral cats wander over from several farms. Treat them like any wild animal. Stay away from the green cat. We don't think that one is a cat. 17. If you find a Barbie doll in 80s style clothes, do not interact with it. It likely escaped its cabinet. People claim it can be rather vicious. 18. Do not enter the pool after hours. 19. If you're outside at night, try not to wander too far outside of the lights of the parking lot. You should be safe along the road, but people claim to hear voices and growls from the dark of the woods and sometimes the nearby cornfields. 20. Be wary about inviting strangers into your room. Guests swear entities have attached themselves to them and followed them home. 21. The spirit of a little girl or an entity mimicking one has been sighted throughout the property. Staff calls her Gabby. She's harmless. Don't try to catch her. It's a waste of energy. 22. Food prepared here is most definitely food, bought from various local farms or frozen grocery aisles. The human meat selection was just a part of a Halloween prank from 2022. We don't serve human meat, and we never have. 23. Please don't vandalize the runes or pictograms carved into the wood. 24. Once again, do not enter the pool after hours. Safety is not guaranteed. 25. Exercise equipment in the fitness area outside the pool is free to use. People have reported strange activity on the weight machine, including moving by itself, and many who swear it's heavier than the weight they thought they put on. Be careful. 26. On Halloween, the inn brings out a model skeleton. It is motorized. It dances on its own. Please don't touch it. 27. We don't know what very haunted ceiling means. 28. We don't know why people claim to see a tiny woman making lewd gestures in the first floor men's room. We advise guests not to interact with it. And that's it. It ends with, please enjoy your stay. If you see anything frightening, feel free to consult the staff. I honestly don't have anything to add. Trista speaks highly of Zach Bronson, the current owner and caretaker. He seems like a nice guy. Uses a lot of eyeshadow and piercings. He was probably a punk rocker as a kid. I heard he was dating a farm boy in town for a while, but Trista said it never actually happened. But anyway, yeah, that's a small sample of the Moonlight Inn. According to Trista, each one of those rules has at least one story attached. Several of them involve people disappearing. She wouldn't tell me which ones. She did say she saw the endless hallway. She insisted I share that story. According to her, you usually end up in it when you aren't really paying attention. I was scrolling on my phone while I was wandering around on a slow night. I rounded the corner down the second floor hallway and wandered for a bit. I didn't realize anything was off until I looked up. I was next to room 220-something. We definitely don't have that many rooms. I looked out the window and saw nothing but black. I looked ahead and saw that the hall just kept going and going and going. Like, it faded into darkness because it went farther than I could see. It was freaky, man. I realized what was going on and turned around. I'd seen the poster board. Once I rounded the corner, everything went back to normal. I turned around again, and the hallway ended like normal. So, maybe she's just fucking with me again. But I will say this. People have disappeared in this hotel. There's missing persons reports and everything, and nobody knows what happened to them. At least 7 people are known to have last been seen on the premises. One was even seen entering the pool at night on their security cameras, but he was never seen leaving, so I'll leave you guys to make your own opinions. The people there are good people. Feel free to stay the night. Just be sure to follow the rules. I found my doppelganger, and my life hasn't been the same since. It started with a photograph. My friend Sarah texted me one evening, asking if I had a twin. I laughed it off, knowing I was an only child. Then she sent me a picture she had taken at a local coffee shop. My smile faded. The man in the photo looked exactly like me. Same haircut, same build, even the same taste in clothes. He was sitting at a table, reading a book, completely unaware that his picture was being taken. I felt a chill run down my spine. Doppelgangers were supposed to be a myth, right? A creepy coincidence. I told Sarah it was just a look-alike, but I couldn't shake the unease. A few days later, my girlfriend, Lily, mentioned seeing me at a bar downtown. I hadn't been to that bar in months. She insisted it was me, though even describing the jacket I had worn to work that day. The jacket that was currently hanging in my closet. I laughed it off, but now I was starting to feel paranoid. Things got worse. I started receiving texts from friends and colleagues, all saying they had seen me in places I hadn't been. Shopping mall, parks, even at work functions I hadn't attended. Each time, the stories were the same. I was friendly, chatty, and completely myself. Except it wasn't me. One evening, I decided to find him my double. I started frequenting the places where he had been spotted, hoping to catch a glimpse. Days turned into weeks with no luck. I began to question my sanity. Maybe it was just a series of strange coincidences. Maybe I was overreacting. Then one night, I came home to find the lights on. I distinctly remembered turning them off before leaving. My heart pounded as I crept inside, fearing an intruder. But the apartment was empty, nothing out of place except for one thing: a note on the kitchen counter. "Stop looking for me." I felt a surge of anger. Who was this person, and why was he messing with my life? I tore the note to shreds, determined not to be intimidated. But the fear lingered. Someone who looked exactly like me had been in my home. Someone who knew I was looking for him. The next day at work, my boss called me into her office. She looked concerned, asking if everything was okay. Apparently, I had missed an important meeting the previous day. I hadn't. I was there, taking notes, participating. I even remembered the discussions we had. But she insisted I wasn't. That night, I set up a camera in my living room, hoping to catch my doppelganger in the act. I barely slept, jumping at every noise, every creak of the floorboards. In the morning, I checked the footage. It showed me walking into the apartment, looking around, and then leaving again. Except I hadn't come home until much later. My doppelganger was real, and he was living my life. I started to lose track of what was real and what wasn't. Friends would ask about conversations I didn't remember having, places I didn't remember going. I began to isolate myself, fearing that I was losing my grip on reality. One evening, while staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I noticed something. A small scar above my eyebrow. I had gotten it in a bike accident when I was 12. I realized that if this imposter looked exactly like me, he must have that scar too. It was a small detail, but it was something only someone who had lived my life would have. Determined to confront him, I went to all the places he had been seen, asking around, showing the photographs Sarah had taken. Finally, a barrister recognized him and mentioned he was a regular, always coming in around the same time each week. I waited at the coffee shop, nerves on edge. Hours passed, and then there he was. Seeing him in person was like looking into a mirror. He saw me too, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and walked out. I followed him, determined to get answers. We ended up in a quiet park, and finally, he turned to face me. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Who are you?" He just smiled again. "I'm you. The you that you could have been. The you that took risks, made different choices. The you that lived life to the fullest." I shook my head. "That doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't have to," he replied. "Just know this. You can't escape me. I'm always going to be there, living the life you didn't." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in stunned silence. I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there, living my life, making different choices, always one step ahead. If you ever see someone who looks exactly like you, don't ignore it. Don't dismiss it as a coincidence. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't a monster or a ghost. It's the thought that there might be another you out there, living a life you never chose. Mr. Skittles is still hungry. I need to find something else. The small cans of cat food don't seem to satisfy him anymore. I wonder what I should use. Have you ever had a picky pet? One that just wouldn't eat the food that you got for them? Well, that is how Mr. Skittles is. He used to eat almost everything, but now something has changed. Mr. Skittles is the stray cat that I recently adopted, or rather he just let himself into my home, and I have been caring for him. He is very cute, long calico hair, which is exceptionally rare among male cats. It is why I called him Mr. Skittles, since he had so many colors. I suppose it makes sense. Mr. Skittles is not an ordinary calico cat. He is very big, very talkative, and just kind of larger than life. Above all, though, what he is especially ravenous. He is the hungriest animal I have ever seen. I feel like if he had been orange, I would have named him Garfield. It may have been the best name since Mr. Skittles eats more than a large breed of dog would. Dry food, wet food, people food, garbage, just about anything he can get at he will eat. I was worried he would eat me out of house and home. My habit for feeding the strays was never too expensive. Yet with Mr. Skittles and how much he could put away, it was getting crazy. At some point, he stopped eating his food. I thought this was very strange since he was always perpetually hungry, but he seemed to ignore my attempts at feeding him for a few days and just lounged around. I decided to take the surplus and try and feed some of the other strays, but I noticed that they were not coming around the house anymore. I considered it might just be a territorial thing, and they figured Mr. Skittles reigned supreme here now. But I still thought it was odd. The next few days, I noticed missing posters appearing for some folks' cats and dogs. I felt bad and hoped they would find them, but was troubled by how many there were. I thought I might have to keep Mr. Skittles inside where it was safe in case there was something dangerous in the neighborhood. I found it difficult to make him stay in. I offered him some cat food, and he turned his nose at it. I kept offering food to him, and he kept yowling back at me as if he were offended by the meager tribute. I even tried to give him a raw steak in the fridge, and he turned it down as well. He just kept howling at the door to be let out, so I finally just opened it for him. He raced away and out of sight. Later that night, I heard what sounded like a cat fight outside, and when I went out to check on it, I found Mr. Skittles ready to come inside. I was concerned since it appeared that he had several splotches of blood on his fur, and especially around his face. The fact that he did not possess any wounds meant the blood was not his own, but I felt bad for whatever other cat had crossed him. He once again refused any offered food and seemed to move about very sluggishly for the rest of the night. I did not think much of his adventures outside since he had been an outdoor cat previously. I did grow concerned when I looked near the back porch steps where many of the stray cats congregated, and I saw a tremendous volume of flies swarming near it. I figured something might have died under there, but when I went to check, I found several small bones and a disturbing amount of blood staining the area. I was even more scared to let him out again if something was hurting or killing the neighborhood cats. But he was insistent, and I gave in again and let him go. I remembered that day since I had to work, and when I returned my neighbor Candace, an older retired woman was looking for her dog Brutus, who had not come home all day. He had been out in her fenced backyard, but had vanished, and she was distraught and had no idea how he could have gotten out. In the evening at dinner time, Mr. Skittles returned home. His sides were bulging, and he seemed to have gained 10 pounds based on how chunky he was all of a sudden. Again, he was spattered with red, and I was worried he was getting into fights with outside animals. He refused any food for an entire day, and half the day afterwards. I considered calling a vet and seeing if something might be wrong with him. But I was a little strapped for cash, and he did not seem outwardly injured or in trouble, so I figured as long as he didn't get rabies or something, he would be fine. The flies near the back porch had gotten worse. I went out there to check and was disturbed at what I found. There was blood, fur, and scraps of what looked like the shredded remains of a leather collar. I was shocked when I found a small tag showing the name of Brutus. Oh no, that was Candace's dog. Had he been in my yard at some point and lost his collar? 2 days afterward, Mr. Skittles seemed thin again somehow. He was begging to be let outside, and despite all the animal attacks, I let him out with the resolution that I needed to get him a rabies vaccine and keep an eye on him to be safe. I stayed up late that night and was concerned when he did not come home. I left my porch light on and watched till almost 2 a.m. I noticed mine was the only light on, which seemed weird since normally Candace would still have some of her lights on. Sleeping or not, she always left them on for security. I thought it was odd they were shut down just then. The next day, Mr. Skittles still hadn't returned, and I was worried he was lost as well. I was about to put up my own missing pet flyers when I saw him lumber into the house. He looked gigantic, and blood was tinged all over his fur. Fortunately, he had no apparent injuries. Before I could check too closely, he came inside, plopped himself on the couch, and went to sleep. He slept for almost 2 days straight. Nothing could stir him, and I thought it was strange he wouldn't get up for anything. Last night, when I was cooking dinner, I noticed I was out of eggs. Since I needed a couple for the dinner I was making, I decided I might go over and ask Candace for some. She often offered help with my misadventures in cooking, and I figured she wouldn't mind. I went over to her house and noticed her mail piling up in the box outside. I considered that she might be away on vacation or something, but her car was still in the driveway. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer, and I reluctantly went back home. It seemed very strange for her to be out without her car, but I did not know what was going on for sure, so I went back home and went to bed. Mr. Skittles woke me up in the middle of the night and was yowling to go outside. It was very early in the morning, so I got up and let him out of my room, but didn't go with him to the door. I thought I heard a thumping or crashing sound and figured he might have knocked something over doing zoomies. I was annoyed, but too tired to deal with it just then. After just a couple of minutes, I was woken up again by a loud scream. It rang through the house for a moment and was suddenly cut off. It sounded horrible, and I panicked, realizing someone was in my house. I grabbed my phone for a flashlight and cautiously stepped out of my bedroom. I heard a wet crunching sound and smelled blood immediately. I was scared and moved toward the light switch in the hall. I reached for the switch and gasped out loud when the hall was illuminated. To my shock and horror, I saw a man with a ski mask covering his face, lying on the ground in the hall. He was dead, and a large pool of blood was surrounding his body. His throat was torn open, and the second shock of the night was the small form I saw besides the body. It was Mr. Skittles, and he was taking large, gruesome bites out of the intruder's neck, his jaw extending like a snake to allow him to consume huge chunks of meat. He turned to me and purred and dropped a large chunk of flesh near where I sat, in some gesture of morbid tribute. Crouching back in horror at the gruesome spectacle, I realized I had found out what Mr. Skittles had been eating. When Mr. Skittles finished his morbid meal and laid down for a long nap, I finally summoned the nerve to call the police. I told them a complete lie and said that it was a mountain lion that had come into our neighborhood and had attacked the intruder while looking for food. I even speculated that it was responsible for the animal disappearances. Despite the outlandish nature of the lie, the police didn't argue, since the intruder clearly had not been killed by conventional means or by any human hands. Eventually, the police had left and removed the intruder's body. Later, in a separate and tragic investigation, they had also removed the mostly eaten remains of Miss Candace next door. I felt bad about it since I knew it was no mountain lion that had done that. Now I find myself in this predicament. I know I have to find some way to feed Mr. Skittles. I thought cat food was expensive, but this is going to be a bit trickier since Mr. Skittles is always hungry, and I am afraid of what he might try to eat next. The stalking. I've worked as an investigative journalist for over 30 years. It wasn't a dream job, but it paid the bills. My old man was an editor at a national magazine, and I was his only son. He wanted me to follow in his steps and succeed him, but I wasn't cut out for that shit. When he passed away, I thought I was finally free. This tiring job, however, had already become a part of me at that point in time. I couldn't just leave a promising career behind and start anew somewhere else. Everything I built up to that point would just go down the drain. I couldn't afford that, so I kept doing this shitty job. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of disturbing things. Now and then, a case would come up and keep me awake for days, but I always found a way to cope. Whether it was drinking myself to oblivion or getting high enough to forget my bloody name. It was also these messed up cases that ended my relationship with my fiancée. I should have seen it coming. Claire worked at a pub when I first met her. She was a medical student in her last semester. A mutual friend, let's call him Jack, introduced me to her. I wouldn't say she was particularly pretty back then, but there was something about her that intrigued me. We met up a few times without Jack, and the rest is history. I liked the way she made me feel, and the way she looked into my eyes when we spoke. Oh God, I really miss her. One case, especially, was the nail in the coffin of our strained relationship. After that incident, she had enough. I had enough. I became a mess. I couldn't even blame her. It was my fault. I shouldn't have let that case take up so much time in my head. But I couldn't control it. Something about that case was beyond disturbing. It was painful. Even for an outsider like me, it was fucking painful. I never recovered from that one. I still have these stupid dreams and I don't know what to do. Maybe you'll understand. This is the last time you'll hear from me. Kamel Alpaslan, a 13-year-old boy from an immigrant household. Both of his parents emigrated from Turkey during the 1980s. His father worked as an industry worker at one of the local factories, while his mother was a housewife. On the morning of July 24, 2013, the factory blew up due to a neglected error, causing the death of 176 workers, the majority of them foreigners who sold themselves cheap. The fatal error could have been detected in time had the CEO, Mr. Cooper, followed protocol and listened to the workers, who filed several anomaly reports weeks before the incident occurred. Due to the workers' immigrant background and illegal settlement in the country, only a few of the deceased's families received compensation. The entire incident was swept under the rug. Kamel and his mother moved back to Turkey after this incident. They lived in the countryside with his maternal grandmother and uncle. His mother didn't remarry. She toiled away in the fields, breaking up the soil to ensure a bountiful harvest. His uncle was a husbandry worker who raised and took care of other people's livestock. Things were looking up for a bit, but the string of tragedies that followed them did not end there. I was visiting their village for an entirely different reason. My good friend, Emre Kaya's remains were scheduled to be buried in the village he was born at, or what remained of it. That is, Claire and I had a huge fight the week before I departed. I told her I had to cancel our wedding dress appointment and travel to Turkey for the funeral. I knew what I was getting into, but I thought I could patch things up. Emre was a good friend and an even better colleague. When he lost his life in Gaza back in May 2024, it took us a year and a half to retrieve his remains. His family was devastated. He left 2 daughters and a wife behind in order to secure footage for us at a place heavily censored in the mainstream media. I wasn't the only one who attended his funeral. Our entire team did. We owed him that much. He was a brave soul, a good man with a good head on his shoulders. The incident that shook me happened on the day of the funeral. After bidding farewell to my friend for the final time, a commotion broke out. This kid, I'll call him Ollie, interrupted the funeral during the religious prayer. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I picked up some words I learned from Amir. The word that struck me the most was Erldu, dead. Someone was dead. The kid wasn't referring to my friend. The locals rushed after the kid, and my team followed them to the other side of the village to a wilted pasture, which was used for livestock grazing in its former glorious days. There, at the center of the yellow pasture, a boy hung from an oak tree. Damie and Elijah, 2 of our cameramen, filmed the entire thing as the locals cut the kid free from the women's, stalking around his broken throat. What was bizarre, and what eventually stuck with me from this case for years, was the way he was dressed. Women's clothes, from the stocking that squeezed the life out of him to the emerald tulle dress that reached his knees and subtly danced to the wintry high winds. His rigid face was peaceful and at peace, as if he were sleeping, like a princess, forever young. His name was Kamel Alpaslan. I will never forget his name. His story ended much earlier than it should have. Growing up in a traditional Turkish family in the country, his family expected him to work in the fields and take over the husbandry business. But Kamel was different. He liked to listen to pop music and doll himself up with his mother's dresses and makeup when she wasn't around. of feminine nature, painfully visibly so. Many villagers, albeit outwardly religious and against homosexuality, took advantage of his inherent nature to embrace his femininity. A child prostitute, he sold his underdeveloped body to get acceptance from the society that shunned people like him. He didn't know right from wrong. He just wanted to be himself, to find comfort in the fact that someone other than himself perceived him as the woman he felt like within. When the words of his sodomy reached his uncle's ears, the imam of the local mosque, he knew he had to make a choice. Either hide behind a mask forever or seek help from the only person he could trust, his mother. He chose the latter. It was a mistake. Camel was the only thing left from her husband. He was the only thing that kept her slaving through the day despite everything. When he reached out to her, begging for her to be his haven, her older brother convinced her to rid their family of this shame. To save face, they smothered him in his sleep, put on him the most beautiful dress, and then hanged him with the things he most loved. His mother stayed with him until his eyes rolled backwards and his throat broke in half. Not once did she tear her bloodshot eyes away from him as the poor thing smiled through the pain to comfort her, to assure her it was okay what she did to him. When everything was over, she clung to his naked legs and kissed him. If she didn't put an end to it now, in her own way, as gently as possible, she thought he'd live a wretched existence in a community full of hypocrites, who shunned sodomites, but took advantage of them still the same. This was the least she could do for her beloved daughter, whom she watched grow into the beautiful woman she was and would forever be. Forever young, forever beautiful, forever lost in time. There, in a sea of wilted grass, dancing subtly to the whistling wind, she wore a serene smile as the stocking she cherished took her life time and again. Sunstroke. Some of my memories get all blurry, but that day will be with me forever. It was hot that day, and we weren't used to it. Mom had taken us to one of my favorite places, the zoo. I always loved watching the animals there, especially the meerkats. I would always find them hilarious, the way they would stand on top of their little dirt mounds like they were little lookout guards. My brother would always be giggling in his pram as Mum showed him around. We spent the whole day exploring that place. I was having so much fun, but it was so hot that day, and by the end, we were all very tired. Mum was so tired from pushing my little brother in the pram all day. We eventually decided to go back home. Mum didn't have a car, so we got a train from near where we lived and got off at the station near the zoo. The walk to the zoo was fine, but the walk back was so long. The heat was just never ending. As we waited on the station platform, I could see how tired Mum was. She was swaying from side to side and looked like she was barely hanging on. I could see her eyes slowly starting to close like she was about to go to sleep. I remember hearing the train coming and people starting to get up from their seats. It all happened like it was slow motion. I still remember seeing the pram slowly rolling off the side of the platform onto the tracks. I remember the gasps and shouts from people on the platform. I remember the cries of my baby brother before the train hit. What I remember most is the sound of Mum screaming. I'll remember it forever. I didn't know a person could make a sound like that. It reminded me of one of the animal screeches from the zoo. That sound still makes my whole body shiver when I think about it. It's hard to remember the rest. Things get blurry. I remember people shouting, people holding my mother as she cried. I remember ambulances and police cars. I remember people in green clothes leading me away from Mum. I remember crying. Why were they taking me away from Mum, the only person I have that cared for me? Eventually, I was taken away in a car, and things get too blurry after that. It was a while later, but a policeman eventually came to visit me. He told me that Mum was at the hospital, that she was sick from something he called sunstroke, and that's why she had been so tired. It's been a long time since that day. I'm older now, living in a foster home. I hate it here, and the other kids don't talk to me much. Mum was the only family I had. Dad died a long time ago. I don't have anyone else. Mum never got better after that day. I never saw her much, but sometimes the people at the foster home let me visit the hospital she stayed at. I tried talking to her, but Mum kept crying every time I spoke. She would always cry and wouldn't look at me. I don't understand. I thought she would be happy to see me again. I thought we could go back to the good times, but we never did. Mum's gone now. I was told she passed away in hospital. I don't like to think about it much. I'm alone now, and I don't know what to do. Dad passed away before I was old enough to know him. We were alone, but not really. We had each other. Eventually things got better, and for a while everything was great. Mum was happy and smiling again. She always made lots of time for me. We played games, went to the zoo and parks. It was great. We were happy. It didn't last though, and soon Mum started seeing someone, a man. I always hated that man. He took Mum away from me. She was so happy before, but now she wouldn't talk to me. We stopped playing games and never went anywhere fun. The man was always loud and angry, and Mum was always sad. She cried a lot. Even when the man left, she cried. I thought that now he was gone, things would go back to the way things were. But then he came. Mum sat me down one day. I thought we were going to do something fun, go to the zoo or a park maybe. Then she told me that I was going to be a big brother. I was confused. I thought it was going to be just us again, like before, when we were happy. Mum was never happy again, not like before, not like the old times. Mum was always tired, and we never did anything fun anymore. Mum would always be with that thing, my baby brother. Never made time for me, never did anything fun. Mum was always tired, always sad, while my brother always cried. He ruined everything. We were happy. Mum was happy until it arrived. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make Mum smile again, and as she closed her eyes at the train platform, I pushed. Fred is paralyzed from the waist down, and he can't walk anymore. He got into a car crash last year, and now he is so depressed. He misses being able to walk and run, and he misses going for strolls in a sunny park. More importantly, he misses falling down and being able to get up from it. How Fred misses being able to use his legs, and he is so jealous of those who can still use their legs. Fred sometimes cries to himself about how his legs have turned out, and how he cannot walk anymore. He was a different man before his legs became paralyzed. Then one day Fred was woken up by his eldest child, and when he realized where he was standing. Then he fell to the ground, and his eldest child was telling him how he was sleepwalking. Sleepwalking was impossible for him because he can't use his legs anymore. Fred needed assistance back to his bed, and his wife has not seen him the same way since his accident. Their relationship has soured a lot. His wife is hardly ever home anymore, and he just wants his legs back to life again. When he went to sleep early again on another day, he heard his eldest child shout his name again, and he found himself standing on his own 2 feet. Then his legs lost their life again, and he fell back down to the ground. Fred was in huge disbelief, and he couldn't believe it. His eldest son recorded him actually sleepwalking, even though he is paralyzed from the waist down. When Fred told his wife and even showed the recording, she shouted at him for pretending to being paralyzed. Fred went back to the doctor, and the doctor confirmed that he was paralyzed from the waist down. Fred found himself waking up on the floor or on random places around the house. It didn't bother him until he found himself in the middle of the road. It further bothered him when he found himself on the edge of places. He had to call out for help to get him back home, or even pull on his arms on the ground to get himself home. His legs seem to have a life of their own whenever he sleeps. He even woke up next to train tracks, and by such grace and luck, passerbys carried him home. Then one night, he found himself on the train tracks. Unlucky for him, the train had sawed off his legs. As he laid there dying, his bloody legs started walking off as they were free.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.